The neighborhood was still half asleep when Marcus Williams stepped onto his front porch with his saxophone. The air was cool, the kind of fragile quiet that comes just before sunrise, when even the birds are hesitant to break the silence. He settled into his old rocking chair, adjusted the reed between his lips, and let out the first note. It was soft at first, a low, breathy hum that curled through the morning air like smoke. Then came another, clearer and brighter, slipping into a slow blues melody that Marcus carried deep in his chest. The sound spread down Maplewood Lane, floating over trimmed hedges and parked cars, weaving its way into the open windows of the houses, still dark with sleep. Old Mr. Henderson, who had fought in Vietnam and lived 2 doors down, cracked open his blinds and smiled. "That boy's got Coltrane in his bones," he muttered to himself, easing into his armchair with a sigh. Across the street, little Emma Torres, still in her pajamas, tugged at her mother's hand. "Mama, the music man's playing," she squealed, running barefoot onto the porch to twirl in the faint light, her hair catching the glow of the rising sun. By the time Marcus shifted into a playful swing rhythm, more doors were opening. Mrs. Patel came out with her coffee cup, leaning on the railing as if the notes flavored her morning brew. A jogger slowed to a walk just to listen, towel draped across his shoulders. Someone even clapped softly when Marcus ended a phrase with a flourish. For Marcus, this ritual wasn't about performing. It was about breathing. Music had carried him through long nights on military bases overseas, through loss, through loneliness. It was the language he trusted most, the only way he knew how to speak to the world without stumbling over words. When the drought of silence pressed too heavy on his spirit, the saxophone was his answer. As the last note drifted into the air, Marcus lowered the instrument and rested it across his knees. A hush lingered on the street, as though the neighborhood itself was reluctant to let the sound go. Then came a ripple of applause, gentle, grateful. Marcus tipped his head, smiling faintly. He hadn't planned on becoming the neighborhood's morning soundtrack, but every day more people seemed to wait for him. And every day his music found new ears, new hearts. What he didn't know was that just a few blocks away, someone else was already plotting to silence him. Karen Whitfield didn't care for jazz. She didn't care for blues either, or really any sound that wasn't perfectly orchestrated to her liking. What she did care about, deeply, was order. From the moment she became president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, she treated the neighborhood like her personal chessboard. Lawns were to be trimmed no higher than 2 inches. Garbage bins had to be pulled in within 30 minutes of pickup. Fences must match in color and height. And above all, quiet hours were sacred. So when Marcus Williams's saxophone began echoing down the cul-de-sac every morning, Karen seethed. At first she tried to ignore it, closing her blinds tighter, muttering under her breath as she poured her coffee. But then she noticed the way her neighbors reacted. Old Henderson grinning at his window. The Torres girl spinning barefoot in the grass. Even Mrs. Patel, who once grumbled about HOA fees, now looked like she had forgotten all her complaints the moment that music started. It wasn't just noise. It was becoming a thing. And Karen hated anything she couldn't control. She made her move at the next HOA meeting. The folding tables in the community center smelled of disinfectant and stale donuts, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Karen, seated at the head of the table, flipped open a binder marked with sticky notes and cleared her throat. "Neighbors," she began in her sharp, practiced voice, "I want to bring up a matter that has been disturbing our mornings. A certain individual has taken it upon himself to perform outdoor concerts on his front porch. Loud, disruptive, and in clear violation of Section 3, Article 12, Noise Ordinances." A murmur ran through the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably, while others glanced at each other, hesitant to speak. "Karen," Mrs. Patel finally said softly, "it's hardly a concert. It's nice. My children actually wake up happy, listening to him play." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules exist for a reason. If we let one man treat the neighborhood like his personal stage, what's next? Drum circles at midnight? Electric guitars in the driveway? This is not the image Maplewood should project." "Marcus isn't disturbing anyone," said Mr. Henderson, leaning heavily on his cane. "He's bringing life to this street. We've had nothing but drought and silence for years. You call it noise. I call it hope." A few people clapped at that, but Karen banged her gavel, an affectation she carried everywhere, though no one had ever voted to give her one. "Enough. This is a rules violation. I am issuing a formal notice. If Mr. Williams does not cease and desist, he will be fined $200 per day until compliance is met." Gasps filled the room. Karen smiled thinly, pleased with her display of authority. The next morning, Marcus opened his door to find a crisp white envelope taped to his porch rail. He pulled it free, unfolded it, and read the words slowly. "Notice of violation. Unauthorized musical performance." He let out a low whistle and chuckled without humor. His neighbors might have clapped yesterday, but it was clear not everyone was on his side. Marcus glanced at the saxophone resting in its case by the door. His fingers twitched with the familiar ache to play. But as he looked at the notice again, his jaw set. "Looks like they want to fight," he murmured. "Well, I've never been afraid of one." The first fine arrived 3 days later. A certified letter, stiff with official language, stamped with the Maplewood HOA seal. "You are hereby assessed a $200 penalty for continued violation of community noise standards." Marcus unfolded the paper at his kitchen table, shaking his head. Leah, his teenage daughter, leaned over his shoulder, reading aloud with mock seriousness. "Failure to pay will result in further legal action," she snorted. "They really mean business." Marcus rubbed his temples. "They mean to shut me up." He set the letter down carefully, as though it might burn through the wood. But silence never saved anyone. Not once. That week, Karen doubled down. She marched door to door with her clipboard, knocking on neighbors' houses in her prim blazer and pearls. "We're collecting signatures," she explained with a practiced frown. "Mr. Williams refuses to respect quiet hours. He's disturbing the peace. Think of your property values. Think of your mornings." Some people signed, intimidated by her authority, but others shut the door politely, or even less politely. When Karen reached Mrs. Patel's house, the woman listened with a raised brow, then said, "My children wake up dancing, Karen. That's worth more than property values." She closed the door firmly in Karen's face. Karen pursed her lips, writing in angry block letters on her clipboard, "Non-compliant." Meanwhile, Marcus tried to hold back. One morning, he kept his saxophone in its case, sipping coffee on the porch instead. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, like a song that ended too soon. The street felt oddly empty. Then Emma Torres padded out of her house in her pajamas, blinking up at him. "Mr. Marcus," she asked in a small voice, "why aren't you playing today?" Marcus swallowed. "Well, some people don't like it, sweetheart. They say it's too noisy." The little girl frowned, shaking her head. "It's not noise, it's happy." She twirled once on the porch, arms wide. "You make the morning happy." Her words hit Marcus harder than any fine. That night, as he sat polishing his saxophone, Leah came to him quietly. "Daddy," she said, "they're trying to take your voice. But your voice makes people strong. Don't let them win." The next morning, the saxophone sang again. The first notes rose into the dawn, soft but certain, like a declaration. Windows opened, neighbors stepped onto porches, some clapping, some swaying to the rhythm. And though a white SUV lingered at the corner, Karen inside, scowling, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. Marcus kept playing. For every fine, he thought, for every complaint, there were smiles, there was joy, there was freedom. And that was worth more than silence ever could be. Within a week, the quiet suburb of Maplewood looked less like a peaceful neighborhood and more like a battlefield. Not one of bricks and bullets, but of clipboards and conversations, whispers and glares. Karen's petition had gathered 30 signatures. She carried the stack of papers in her leather binder like it was a holy book. Each time she saw Marcus on his porch with his saxophone, she smirked, already imagining the HOA board stamping their approval on her case. But for every name she collected, resistance grew louder. It began with little acts of rebellion. One morning, Mr. Henderson rolled out a lawn chair in his driveway, set a thermos of coffee beside him, and sat listening to Marcus's playing like it was a front row seat at a jazz club. He clapped at the end of each song, slow and deliberate, daring Karen to write him up. Next, Mrs. Patel brought her children out with tambourines, letting them shake along with Marcus's rhythm. Laughter spilled down the block, bouncing off the houses. Soon, neighbors who'd never spoken much to each other began gathering on the sidewalks during Marcus's morning sessions, sharing donuts, nodding along, tapping their feet. What had once been a man alone with his horn had become a gathering, a community. Karen was furious. She stormed from house to house, binder clutched to her chest. "Do you understand?" she hissed. "This is a violation. It's lowering our standards. It's making us look unkempt." One young couple raised their brows. "Our mortgage went up, Karen. Music in the mornings isn't what's hurting property values." They closed the door before she could respond. At the mailbox, Mrs. Lopez confronted her directly. "You call it a nuisance. I call it soul. My mother is sick, and that music is the only thing that makes her smile some days. Maybe you should listen instead of complain." Karen flushed, sputtering, "It's against the rules. The rules are what keep this neighborhood civilized." "Civilized?" Lopez shot back. "Or silent." Even the HOA meetings grew tense. Half the room cheered for Karen's crackdown. Half spoke out for Marcus's right to play. Arguments broke out, voices rising until the gavel was pounding uselessly against the table. And through it all, Marcus kept playing. He refused to raise his voice in arguments. He let the music speak. Each note seemed to answer Karen's complaints better than words ever could. But the battle lines were drawn. Karen was gathering her evidence, ready to take the fight beyond fines and petitions. She was preparing for court. And though Marcus's neighbors rallied around him, even he knew. When the HOA dragged a man into court, it wasn't a small fight. It was war. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, its marble floors echoing with each step. Marcus had never set foot in one as a defendant before. He wore his best suit, navy blue, pressed as neatly as his trembling hands would allow. His saxophone case rested at his side, a silent companion. The HOA had come in force. Karen sat in the front row, binder stacked high with papers and regulations, lips pressed into a thin line of triumph. Around her, several board members whispered, their suits stiff, their eyes cold. On the other side of the room, Marcus's supporters filled the benches. Mr. Henderson sat with his cane across his knees. Mrs. Patel clutched her children close, and the Lopez family nodded encouragement. They looked small compared to the HOA's polished presence, but their eyes carried a quiet fire. The judge, an older man with silver hair and sharp glasses, entered briskly. "Case number 415, he intoned. Maplewood Homeowners Association versus Marcus Williams." Karen rose immediately, heels clicking against the floor. "Your Honor, this case is about rules. Our community's covenant is clear. No disruptive noise, no unauthorized performances, and no individual is above the standards we all agreed upon. Mr. Williams has repeatedly, knowingly violated these rules, despite warnings and fines. His actions undermine the peace and order of our neighborhood." She slid a stack of complaints across the table with a flourish. "The HOA seeks an injunction to prohibit him from playing music on his property, and fines for every day of violation." The judge nodded, then turned to Marcus. "Mr. Williams, your response?" Marcus stood slowly. His voice was calm, but beneath it was the steady thrum of a man carrying both pain and pride. "Your Honor," he began, "I never set out to disturb anyone. I play music on my porch because it's who I am. I've played in military bands overseas, at funerals for brothers who never came home, in churches that needed hope. Music has been my voice when words failed me. It's not noise, it's life." He glanced back at his neighbors. "And I've seen what it does here. Children dance, elders smile, families gather. It's not breaking the community, it's building it." Karen shot to her feet. "Objection! Emotional appeals are irrelevant." The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your chance, Mrs. Whitfield. Sit down." Marcus hesitated, then rested a hand on the saxophone case at his feet. "If the court will allow," he said softly, "I'd like to show you better than I can tell you." The courtroom went still. Even Karen froze, eyes narrowing. The judge peered over his glasses. Show us? Marcus lifted the case, opening it with a soft click. The brass glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. He placed the mouthpiece gently against his lips, adjusted the reed, and looked to the bench. Permission to let the music speak, Your Honor. The judge leaned back, curious. Proceed. As Marcus drew the first note, rich and low, the courtroom seemed to exhale. The sound rolled over the wooden benches, filling the air with something that was more than melody. It was memory. It carried sorrow, but also hope. The struggles of generations, the joy of survival, the prayer of freedom all wrapped in sound. One by one, people closed their eyes. Mrs. Patel wept silently, her children holding her hands. Mr. Henderson straightened his back, as if the music lifted him. Even the court clerk paused mid-note-taking, pen frozen. And then, something remarkable happened. The judge, stern, distant, slowly rose to his feet. He removed his glasses, set them on the desk, and stood with his head bowed, as though honoring the anthem of a country older than laws. The last note lingered like incense, hanging in the silence, long after Marcus lowered the horn. Karen slammed her binder shut, furious, but the moment had already shifted. Everyone could feel it. The case wasn't about rules anymore. It was about something larger, something no fine or ordinance could erase. The silence after Marcus's last note was thicker than stone. For a moment, no one dared move. The sound seemed to linger in the very walls, as though the courthouse itself refused to let it go. Judge Harrington stood behind his bench, head bowed, eyes closed. Slowly he inhaled, then placed his glasses back on. When he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made even Karen flinch. Mr. Williams, he said, what you played was not noise. It was art. It was history. It was freedom expressed in its purest form. And this court cannot, be used as a weapon to silence that. The room stirred, gasps and murmurs rising. Karen leapt to her feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The HOA covenants are binding contracts. If you allow this man to ignore them, you undermine the very structure of our community. The judge raised his hand sharply. Mrs. Whitfield, sit down. His voice cracked like thunder. You speak of structure. I speak of spirit. Our Constitution itself protects freedom of expression. Music, especially when it harms no one, is protected. You may not use neighborhood covenants to strip away constitutional rights. A ripple of applause spread across the benches. Henderson clapped his weathered hands, Mrs. Patel wiped her tears, and the Torres girl whispered to her mother, See? The music man can stay. Karen's face burned crimson. She slammed her binder shut with a smack. This isn't over, she hissed under her breath, but the words felt hollow now. The judge continued, his eyes locked on Marcus. This court dismisses the HOA's complaint with prejudice. Mr. Williams owes no fines. He may continue to play as he wishes, so long as he does not cause measurable harm. And as far as this bench is concerned, the only thing harmed today was the arrogance of those who sought to silence him. Cheers broke out, echoing through the chamber. People stood, clapping, some even whistling. The bailiff looked uncertain about enforcing order, but the judge merely let it happen, his stern face softening into the faintest smile. Marcus, still holding his saxophone, lowered his head humbly. He hadn't come seeking glory, only the right to breathe through his music. Yet here he was, vindicated. His voice carried further than he had ever imagined. Leah gripped his hand tightly, whispering, You did it, Daddy. You really did it. But Marcus shook his head. No, baby. We did. All of us who believed. Behind them, Karen slipped out of the courtroom, her heels clicking angrily against the tile. But her power, once absolute in the neighborhood, had crumbled in front of a single song. That night, as the neighborhood settled into the cool quiet of evening, Marcus stepped back onto his porch. This time, no envelope waited on the railing, no threats, no fines. Only neighbors gathering with lawn chairs, children racing barefoot, and families bringing pie and coffee as though it were a festival. Marcus lifted his horn and played, not in defiance this time, but in celebration. And across Maplewood Lane, windows opened, hearts opened, and the music carried higher than ever before. The following morning, Maplewood Lane woke not to the stiff silence Karen once demanded, but to the golden rise of Marcus's saxophone. The first notes curled through the cool air, slow and steady, like the dawn itself had chosen to speak in music. This time, there was no hesitation. Doors swung open. Neighbors streamed out in robes and slippers, coffee mugs steaming in their hands. Children scampered barefoot to the edge of the street, clapping to the rhythm. Even Mr. Henderson, leaning heavily on his cane, shuffled out to take his usual spot in the lawn chair, nodding along with the beat. Soon, the whole block looked like a street-side concert. Families brought folding chairs, mothers passed out muffins, someone wheeled out a cooler of lemonade. What had begun as one man's morning ritual had grown into a gathering that united them all. Karen stayed hidden behind her curtains. She peeked out only once, binder clenched tight in her lap. The sound of applause and laughter grated against her ears. But there was nothing left she could do. The court had spoken, the neighbors had chosen, and Marcus's music had become the heart of Maplewood. Her once powerful voice had been drowned out by the very thing she hated most. A song too beautiful, too human, to be silenced. As the last notes lingered in the morning air, Marcus lowered the horn. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping, stomping their feet on porches and driveways. Marcus smiled, tipping his head modestly, but Leah pushed him forward. "Play another one, Daddy," she urged, grinning. "They're not ready to stop." So he did. The saxophone soared again, brighter, freer, filled not with defiance but with joy. And for the first time, Maplewood Lane wasn't just a neighborhood bound by HOA rules and manicured lawns. It was a community, alive and breathing together, held in harmony by the notes of a black musician who refused to be silenced. The judge's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he played, "This is not noise. This is freedom." And freedom, once set free, could not be stopped.